My name is Hannah Miller, and I'm 32 years old. On the day my younger sister Lydia got married, I learned that sometimes the people who share your blood can wound you deeper than any stranger ever could. It was supposed to be a celebration, the fairy tale wedding our parents had always dreamed of. The Grand View Manor glittered like a cathedral made of glass, chandeliers dripping gold, tables crowned with roses, laughter swirling in the air like champagne bubbles. But beneath the music and perfume, I could feel it, the quiet cruelty Lydia had planned with the precision of a jeweler setting a diamond. Because this wasn't just her wedding day. It was my public humiliation. The first blow came with the seating chart. While family and close friends filled the front tables under the chandeliers, my name sat alone on a white card in looping gold script, Table 12. Tucked in the far corner, next to the kitchen doors where waiters vanished with trays and the hum of dishwashers drowned small talk. They called it the singles table. I called it exile. I tried to pretend it didn't sting. I told myself it was fine, that Lydia had just been thoughtless, that it didn't matter where I sat. But as I walked past the elegantly dressed guests and the soft glow of candlelight, I could hear the whispers that always seemed to follow me. Lydia's sister, right? The older one? She's still single? Every word felt like static pressing against my chest. From across the room, Lydia sparkled in white lace, her laughter cutting through the noise like silver wind chimes. She looked perfect, radiant, adored, the kind of woman who had everything, a wealthy husband, parents bursting with pride, and an audience to watch her shine. I should have been happy for her. I tried to be. But then she looked straight at me and smiled, that same smug, polished smile she used whenever she thought she'd won. I could almost hear her voice in my head, dripping with the fake sympathy she'd mastered so well. Don't look too miserable in the photos, okay? I took my seat at the reject table, smoothing the navy dress I'd spent weeks picking out. It had taken courage to come here alone. But courage, I was learning, doesn't shield you from cruelty. The guests around me barely noticed I was there, Lydia's single co-workers lost in their phones, and our great-aunt Janet complaining about the music. "Hannah," she said loudly, "you should lower your standards, dear. You're not getting any younger." The words landed like tiny stones in my chest. I smiled tightly, as if politeness could dull the sting. And then Lydia appeared, radiant and venomous, with her arm hooked around Richard, her new husband and the pride of our family. "Hannah," she called, her voice sweet as frosting. "Come meet Richard's family. They've heard so much about you." Before I could refuse, she tugged me across the ballroom, her train sweeping behind her like a banner of triumph. "This is my sister," she announced to a circle of elegant strangers. "She's the career girl, too busy conquering the business world to settle down." A ripple of laughter spread through the group. A woman in pearls, Richard's aunt, perhaps, patted my arm with pity. "Don't worry, dear. There's someone for everyone." Lydia laughed softly. "She's very independent. Aren't you, sis?" The way she said independent made it sound like a disease. I tried to smile. "I just haven't met the right person yet." Richard's mother leaned in. Well, don't wait too long, dear. Fertility becomes complicated. The laughter returned, polite and poisonous. My throat tightened. I excused myself and walked back to my lonely corner, heat crawling up my neck. The violin music swelled, as though mocking me. When the photographer asked for family-only pictures, he looked confused when I stood alone. No +1? He asked. I shook my head, and he gave a sympathetic smile that hurt worse than any insult. And then came the bouquet toss. The DJ's voice boomed through the speakers. All the single ladies, to the dance floor. I froze, hoping no one would notice. But Lydia noticed everything. Come on, Hannah, she shouted, waving at me. This could be your lucky night. Before I could protest, her maid of honor dragged me into a circle of 20-something women, all glowing, laughing, perfect. I felt like a misplaced shadow among sunlight. Lydia met my gaze, smirked, and deliberately threw the bouquet in the opposite direction. A younger cousin caught it. Looks like Hannah will have to wait a little longer, she called out, and the crowd erupted in laughter. Their laughter was the sound of glass splintering inside me. I wanted to disappear, to evaporate into the music and vanish before anyone saw the tears gathering in my eyes. I stumbled back to table 12, grabbed my purse, and sat there beneath the flickering candlelight. The ballroom shimmered with gold and joy, and I was invisible in the corner, choking on humiliation. And that's when I heard it, a voice behind me, low and steady. Act like you're with me. I turned, startled. A tall man stood there in a charcoal suit, his dark hair perfectly in place, his expression calm but certain. His eyes were kind, not pitying, not judging, just kind. Excuse me? I whispered. He leaned slightly closer, his tone smooth, deliberate. Your sister's been talking about you for the last 10 minutes. I figured maybe you'd like a little help rewriting the story. I blinked. Lydia's laughter echoed somewhere across the room, and for the first time all night, I felt the ground shift beneath me. He smiled faintly. I'm William. And that's how it began, not with a confession or a promise, but with a whisper that turned humiliation into something else entirely. Before Lydia's wedding, before the champagne flutes and the polished marble, there was always this quiet, invisible war between us. A rivalry so old it was practically stitched into our DNA. People thought we were close because we smiled in photos, because we bought each other birthday gifts, because we sat beside each other at holidays pretending to share the same jokes. But if you looked closely, really closely, you'd see it. The way Lydia's compliments always came with barbs. The way my mother's gaze lingered on her a little longer. The way I learned to shrink whenever Lydia entered a room. We were raised in a middle-class family in Savannah, Georgia, the kind of place where appearances mattered almost as much as truth. Our mother, Diane, was an elementary school teacher with an obsession for perfection. Hair always fixed, house always immaculate, emotions always tidy. Our father, Adam, was gentle but passive, the kind of man who'd rather fold laundry than confront a storm. Lydia, 3 years younger than me, figured out early how to charm them both. She had that sparkle, the loud laugh, the photogenic face, the the kind of confidence that bends rooms toward her. Me, I was the quiet one, the girl with her nose in a book, the one who stayed up late sketching ideas for marketing projects, dreaming of making it big in New York. When I got my degree in business, my parents clapped. But when Lydia got engaged to Richard, they beamed. That's when it started, the comparisons, the subtle digs masked as concern. Maybe you should try dating apps again, Lydia would chirp between bites of dinner. You're 32, hon. Time's ticking, you know. My mother would nod sympathetically. You can't focus on work forever, sweetheart. Life's not all about independence. And I'd sit there, smiling like it didn't hurt, my fork slicing through invisible frustration. Lydia wasn't being cruel, not outwardly, she was being concerned. That's what made it worse. Every family gathering became a small battlefield. When Lydia got her promotion, my mother said, "See, she's balancing career and love so well." When I bought my first apartment, she said, "But who will you share it with, dear?" It was like my achievements didn't count unless someone else's last name followed mine. By the time Lydia announced her engagement to Richard Wellington, a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a luxury watch commercial, she had completely transformed into a woman who thrived on spectacle. I was genuinely happy for her, or tried to be. But the way she made her happiness into a weapon, that was something else. Her social media became a shrine to her new life, the ring, the dress fittings, the engagement brunch at the Four Seasons. Every post had the same undertone. Look how perfect everything is. Look how loved I am. Look how alone you are. The night she called to offer advice before her wedding, I almost didn't pick up. But curiosity, or maybe guilt, made me answer. "Hey, sis," she said, her voice coated in sugary enthusiasm. "Just wanted to check in before the big day. How are you feeling about the wedding?" "I'm fine," I said, even though I wasn't sure what feeling was supposed to go with that question. "That's good. I know it might be hard for you, seeing everyone so happy and in love," she continued, her tone syrupy with condescension. "Just remember, don't look too miserable in the photos, okay? Oh, and maybe tone down the navy dress a little. You don't want people thinking you're trying to outshine me." Outshine her. I wanted to laugh, but the sound died before it reached my lips. After that call, I stood in front of the mirror for nearly an hour, staring at myself. I didn't see the pathetic single woman Lydia seemed to describe. I saw someone who worked hard, paid her bills, stood by her family, and still somehow ended up being the emotional punching bag for everyone else's insecurities. But here's the thing about quiet people. We don't stay quiet forever. We observe. We endure. And when we break, it's rarely loud, but it's final. The morning of the wedding arrived like a postcard. Blue sky, doves, perfect weather. As I zipped up my dress, I told myself I'd survive the day. I'd smile, nod, and clap at all the right moments. I wouldn't give Lydia the satisfaction of seeing me hurt. When I arrived at the Grand View Manor, I remember thinking it looked like something out of a fairy tale. Golden drapes, a string quartet, and a floral archway worth a small fortune. Lydia's planner greeted me at the entrance. "Oh, you must be Hannah," she said brightly, clipboard in hand. "Follow me, you're at table 12. There was that number again. Table 12. I didn't know it yet, but that number would brand itself into my memory like a scar. As the ceremony began, Lydia walked down the aisle like a queen. The crowd gasped, literally gasped, as she passed, every camera snapping. I wanted to feel happy for her. I really did. But there was something hollow about it all. Even the way she looked at Richard, it was more like she was admiring her reflection in his eyes than seeing him. When they kissed, people cried. My mother dabbed her eyes. I clapped on cue, but inside I was numb. During the reception, Lydia seemed to float, hugging, posing, laughing. I stayed at my little exile corner, pretending to be engrossed in my drink. That's when the whispering began. "She's Lydia's sister, right? The single one? Such a shame, she's pretty, but you can tell she's career-focused. Career-focused. That's how they said unwanted. And just when I thought the night couldn't twist any tighter, Lydia called me over. Her bridesmaids giggled as I walked toward her, the air thick with mockery. "Everyone," she announced, "this is my sister, Hannah. She's so dedicated to her job, she hasn't had time to find love yet. But who knows, maybe tonight's the night." The crowd chuckled. Lydia smiled. I felt something die quietly inside me. If you've ever been publicly humiliated by someone who's supposed to love you, you know that feeling, like you're both burning and freezing at once. Like every pair of eyes becomes a mirror, reflecting back everything you fear about yourself. That's when I started planning my exit. Just a quiet disappearance before the speeches. No drama, no confrontation. I'd slip away like smoke, drive home, and forget this nightmare. But life, or maybe fate, had other plans. Because just as I picked up my purse to leave, a voice behind me said, "Act like you're with me." And in that single sentence, the invisible war that had defined my whole life began to shift. The Grandview Manor was a cathedral of celebration that night. Strings of golden light draped like constellations, soft laughter spilling like champagne bubbles, and a perfume of lilies and money in the air. To everyone else, this was a fairy tale. But to me, it was a stage set for humiliation. My name card still waited for me at the corner of table 12. A small island of exiles near the kitchen doors where servers moved in and out like ghosts. From where I sat, I could see everything, the perfect glow of the head table, Lydia's diamond smile, and Richard's proud arm resting around her waist. But from their world, I was practically invisible. The guests around me were strangers. Lydia's single coworkers scrolling on their phones, a distant cousin discussing crypto, and Aunt Janet, who had perfected the art of criticism over 80 years of breathing. "Still not married, Hannah?" she asked without looking up from her plate. "No, Aunt Janet," I said, forcing a polite smile. "Well," she sighed, "you should consider lowering your standards. Men don't grow on trees." Her words landed like crumbs on a spotless floor, small, harmless, but impossible to ignore. I tried to laugh it off. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was just there to celebrate my sister's happiness, not my own pain. But the truth? Every time someone glanced at my bare ring finger, I could feel my pulse in my ears. Lydia's laughter echoed across the room. She was surrounded by her bridesmaids, radiant in their blush gowns, their smiles synchronized like choreography. It was almost impressive, the way she managed to look flawless while orchestrating tiny acts of cruelty. At one point, she waved to me from across the room, motioning me over. I hesitated, but politeness won, as it always did. She slipped her arm through mine, guiding me toward a cluster of Richard's relatives, wealthy, polished people who smelled like prestige and old money. "This is my sister, Hannah," she said, her tone honeyed with fake warmth. "She's our little career woman, too busy conquering the world to find a man." A ripple of laughter spread through the group. I felt the heat crawl up my neck. "Oh dear," said one of them, a Mrs. Wellington, I think. "Don't worry, dear. There's someone for everyone. Have you tried the church group?" My nephew met his wife there. Lydia laughed, not a kind laugh, but the laugh of someone tasting victory. "Hannah's very independent," she added, as if it were a diagnosis. That word again. Independent. The polite world's euphemism for unwanted. I managed to excuse myself and returned to my seat, trying to breathe. The food arrived, untouched. My glass of wine stayed full because my stomach had turned into a knot of shame. But humiliation doesn't happen in silence. It gathers momentum, like an avalanche. When the photographer called for family photos, he looked at me, confused. "+1?" he asked. I shook my head. His brows furrowed. "Right. Single file, then." The words stung, sharper than they should have. And then came the bouquet toss. The DJ's voice blasted through the speakers. "All right, single ladies, to the dance floor." My heart dropped. I stayed seated. Maybe if I stayed perfectly still, I could vanish. But then Marion, Lydia's maid of honor, spotted me. "Come on, Hannah," she shouted, grabbing my hand. "You might get lucky tonight." Lucky. The word burned. Suddenly, I was on the dance floor surrounded by a circle of younger women, Lydia's cousins, her co-workers, all radiant, laughing, 20-something. I felt like an imposter in my own family's celebration. Lydia turned toward me, holding her bouquet. Her eyes met mine, and a slow, deliberate smirk stretched across her face. Then she threw the bouquet in the opposite direction. The crowd erupted in cheers when a girl named Chloe caught it. Lydia clapped dramatically. "Looks like Hannah will have to wait a little longer," she said loud enough for the entire room to hear. People laughed. Not cruelly, but politely, the kind of laugh people give when they don't want to seem uncomfortable. It was worse than cruelty. It was pity wrapped in politeness. My chest ached. My vision blurred. I stepped away, my heels echoing on the marble. I reached table 12, grabbed my purse, and sat down, staring at the flickering candle that cast long, distorted shadows across my hands. And for the first time that night, I thought about leaving. About walking out into the cool night air and never looking back. Outside, I imagined the city lights stretching across the river, promising freedom, freedom from Lydia, from this perfect world that always seemed to have no room for me. I checked my phone. No missed calls. No texts. the loneliness pressed heavier than the silence. That's when I heard it. A deep, calm voice behind me. "Act like you're with me." The words sliced through the noise of clinking glasses and music. I froze. Slowly, I turned. He stood there, tall, dark hair slicked back, wearing a charcoal suit that fit him like it had been tailored by destiny. His expression was confident, but his eyes were kind. There was warmth in them. Recognition, even though I didn't know him. "I what?" I stammered. He leaned closer, his tone quiet but certain. "Your sister's been talking about you. To everyone. I thought maybe you'd like a little help with the narrative." My pulse quickened. "Who are you?" "William," he said, offering a small smile. "Richard's cousin. And you're Hannah, the one everyone apparently needs to worry about." Despite myself, I laughed. It was small, shaky, but real. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. Before I could answer, he pulled out the chair beside me, his movements fluid and deliberate. He rested his arm casually along the back of my chair, leaning in just enough to make the act convincing. From across the hall, Lydia turned. Her expression, frozen for just a second, was priceless. For the first time all night, I didn't feel small. William smiled faintly. "You don't owe them anything," he said softly. "Let them see what they want to see." And in that moment, under the golden chandeliers, surrounded by people who had spent the evening measuring my worth, I decided to stop being invisible. Whatever this was, however long it lasted, I was done being the audience to my own humiliation. So I smiled back at him and said, "Then let's give them a show." His name was William, and from the moment he sat down beside me, it was like the air in the room changed. It wasn't just that he was handsome, though he was, in a quiet, magnetic way. It was the calm in his voice, the subtle confidence in his posture, the way he carried himself like someone who didn't need to prove anything. "You William Wellington," he said, extending his hand. "Richard's cousin from Boston." I hesitated before shaking it. His palm was warm, steady. "Hannah Miller," I replied automatically, though of course, he already knew. He leaned closer, his tone playful but precise. "And well, Hannah Miller, tonight we're going to make sure your sister regrets every word she said about you." A strange laugh escaped my throat, half disbelief, half adrenaline. "And how do you plan to do that?" He smiled. "By letting her think she underestimated you." It was the kind of line that belonged in a movie, but there was no hint of arrogance. "Equal." It was said simply, as though he wasn't performing for anyone but me. And yet, across the room, Lydia had already spotted us. Her smile, tight, controlled, barely concealed the flicker of irritation in her eyes. Good. For once, I wasn't the one squirming under her gaze. William draped his arm casually along the back of my chair, a gesture that looked effortless but deliberate enough to attract attention. He began to talk to me like we'd known each other for years, about the music, the food, the absurdity of how people at weddings acted when they smelled wealth in the air. He listened when I spoke. He asked questions, not the polite, filler kind, but ones that made me feel seen. I told him about my work in marketing, about the campaign I'd just wrapped for a small eco brand, about how exhausting it could be to balance ambition and loneliness. Ambition isn't a flaw, he said. It just scares people who've given up theirs. His words hung in the air like a secret truth. For the first time that night, I laughed without forcing it. He raised his glass. To being underestimated. I clinked mine against his, smiling. To being underestimated. From her seat across the hall, Lydia was pretending not to look, but her eyes kept darting toward us. Her conversation with the wedding planner faltered, her expression tightening. She whispered something to Marion, who turned to glance at our table and then back at Lydia with a half smile. William noticed. Looks like we have their attention. Good, I whispered, savoring the unfamiliar taste of confidence. When Lydia finally approached, she did it with the grace of a general walking onto a battlefield. Her dress trailed behind her like a warning. Hannah, she said sweetly, her voice an octave too high. I didn't know you knew William. Old friends, William said smoothly, reaching for my hand. We lost touch for a bit, but you know how these things go. Her lips tightened. Really? Hannah never mentioned you. I try to keep my private life private, I said calmly. You know how I am about work-life balance. The irony tasted delicious. Lydia, the queen of oversharing, suddenly had no script to follow. Her perfect smile trembled. How wonderful, she said, her tone like a blade wrapped in silk. How long have you two been reconnecting? Long enough, William said, his eyes meeting hers with unshakable calm. For a split second, Lydia's jaw twitched before she retreated, muttering something to Marion as she walked away. William grinned. She looks like she just bit into a lemon. I couldn't help laughing, covering my mouth to hide it. She's not used to being out of control. Well, he said, raising an eyebrow, let's keep her guessing. The rest of the evening unfolded like a slow, graceful dance, only we hadn't even reached the dance floor yet. William played his role perfectly. He was attentive without being overbearing, protective without being possessive. Every gesture, pouring my wine, leaning close to listen, brushing a stray hair from my shoulder, was calculated to look natural, but it carried weight. It said, she's not alone anymore. I noticed how the room's energy shifted. The same guests who'd pitied me earlier now eyed us with interest. Lydia's friends whispered behind their hands. Even Mrs. Wellington, who had once patted my arm like I was a lost cause, now smiled approvingly at William. It was intoxicating, the sudden reversal of power. But somewhere between the charade and the small talk, something shifted. When the band started playing slow songs, William turned to me and said, "Dance with me." It wasn't a question. For a moment, panic fluttered in my chest. I know, I don't dance. Sure you do, he said, standing and offering his hand. You just haven't had the right partner? The simplicity of his confidence disarmed me. I hesitated, then placed my hand in his. His grip was firm, grounding. The dance floor glowed beneath the chandeliers, the music soft and slow. As he drew me close, I felt every curious gaze turn toward us, the same crowd that had watched me crumble earlier now, watching in quiet disbelief. I met Lydia's eyes across the room. Her smile was gone, her posture stiff, her champagne glass trembling ever so slightly in her hand. William leaned down, his breath brushing my ear. "Your sister's watching." "I know," I whispered. "She looks like she's going to explode." "Mission accomplished," he murmured. I laughed quietly, a sound I barely recognized as my own. It was the laugh of someone who'd finally stepped out of the shadows. As we moved to the rhythm, my earlier humiliation melted away. The laughter, the whispers, the bouquet, all of it blurred into irrelevance. What mattered was this moment, the warmth of his hand, the steadiness of his presence, the surreal comfort of being seen. For once, I wasn't trying to prove myself. I wasn't the invisible sister, the family's cautionary tale, the woman too independent for love. I was just me. And someone finally saw me. When the song ended, William didn't let go immediately. His hand lingered at my waist, his eyes searching mine. "You're not what I expected," he said softly. "What did you expect?" "Based on your sister's description?" he said with a faint smirk. "Someone desperate, someone sad. But instead, I find a woman who knows exactly who she is, and just needed someone to remind her." For a heartbeat, I forgot where we were. From the corner of my eye, I saw Lydia turn away, her laughter forced and brittle. For the first time in years, I didn't feel beneath her. I felt above it all, calm, steady, untouchable. William's hand brushed mine again. "Ready for round 2? "What's round 2? I asked, smiling despite myself. He grinned. "The part where we make her wish she'd never underestimated you." For the next hour, the night turned into something I'd never experienced before. Not revenge in its sharp, vindictive form, but something far sweeter, quieter, and infinitely more satisfying. It was power disguised as grace. William never broke character, not once. He played the role of the affectionate boyfriend with such natural ease that even I started to believe it. He poured wine into my glass before his own. He laughed at my dry jokes like they were the funniest thing he'd heard all night. And when he looked at me, he didn't just look, he saw me. Every gesture, every glance, was intentional. A symphony of subtle rebellion against the humiliation I'd endured all evening. At first, I thought the guests might lose interest, but gossip feeds on envy like a fire feeds on oxygen. Whispers spread from one corner of the hall to another, soft and sizzling. "Who's he? Is he with her?" I thought she came alone. Even the band seemed to sense a shift in the room's rhythm. The music slowed, softened, romanticized. Across the room, Lydia's perfect facade began to splinter. She still smiled for the cameras, still tossed her hair at Richard's side, but her eyes betrayed her. They kept darting toward us, toward me, like a compass unwilling to point anywhere else. At one point, William leaned close and whispered, "She's unraveling." I smiled into my glass. "Good." He chuckled softly. "You wear revenge well." I tilted my head. "This isn't revenge," I said, almost believing it. "It's balance." He studied me, his expression unreadable for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough." When dinner was served, the waiter approached our table. William set down his fork and said, "Excuse me, my partner and I have some dietary restrictions." Could we be moved somewhere with a bit more light and easier access for service? Of course, Mr. Wellington, the waiter said instantly, recognizing the surname. Within minutes, we were relocated, not to the back corner near the kitchen, but front and center, directly across from the newlyweds. I couldn't help it. I almost laughed. Lydia's eyes widened just slightly, her jaw tensing as she realized that her reject sister now sat under the chandelier's perfect spotlight. The new table was surrounded by people who had previously ignored me. Suddenly, they couldn't stop asking questions. So, how long have you two known each other? What a lovely couple you make. Hannah, why didn't you tell us about him? I smiled politely, leaning into William's shoulder, just enough for the message to register. Oh, it's still new, I said. We're taking things slow. William squeezed my hand beneath the table. Slow, but worth it. It was a small gesture, but it sent another wave of whispers rolling through the room. Even Mrs. Wellington, the matriarch who'd pitied me earlier, suddenly wanted to know more. William, dear, she said, your family must be so proud. And Hannah, such a poised young woman. A wonderful match. Poised. A wonderful match. The same people who had pitied me 2 hours ago now spoke to me with reverence. Funny how status could rewrite a person's worth in real time. I caught Lydia watching me, pretending to laugh at something Richard said, but her knuckles whitened around her champagne flute. The band began playing a slow waltz, and William turned to me with that confident smile that seemed to disarm the whole room. Shall we? I don't know, I said quietly. I've never really. He extended his hand. Trust me. And I did. As we moved onto the dance floor, the world seemed to dim around us. His hand found my waist, firm but respectful, guiding rather than leading. The music swelled, a romantic melody that seemed almost too poetic for the moment. Every turn, every step felt deliberate, choreographed not for perfection, but for presence. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was seen. I could feel the stares, Lydia's especially, drilling into us from across the room. She's watching, William whispered, his breath warm against my ear. I know, I said, smiling. She looks like she's going to explode. He laughed quietly. Good. Maybe she'll finally learn that humiliation doesn't look good on anyone. Halfway through the dance, Lydia appeared beside us, dragging Richard in tow, her voice pitched higher than usual. Mind if I cut in? Her smile was brittle, a porcelain mask hiding a storm. William didn't miss a beat. Actually, yes, he said, polite but firm. We're having a moment. Lydia blinked, thrown off. For a second, I almost felt sorry for her, almost. I just wanted to say how happy I am that Hannah finally found someone, she said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. We were all so worried about her. William stopped dancing. The air between us stilled. Were you? He asked, his tone sharp but controlled. Because from what I've observed tonight, it seems like you've been more interested in broadcasting her single status than celebrating her happiness. The words cut through the music like a blade. Conversations faltered. The room fell into a hush. Lydia's painted smile flickered. I just want what's best for her, she stammered. And then maybe, William said evenly, you should treat her with the respect she deserves, instead of using her as entertainment for your guests. Richard shifted uncomfortably beside her, tugging at his cufflinks. Maybe we should, but Lydia's composure cracked. I don't know what she's told you, she began, voice trembling. She didn't have to tell me anything, William interrupted. I have eyes. The silence that followed was thick, electric. Lydia blinked rapidly, her face draining of color. Around us, people exchanged awkward glances. Even the music seemed hesitant to start again. And then William smiled gently, as if releasing the tension on purpose. Now, if you'll excuse us, I promised her this dance. He turned back to me, his eyes soft but unyielding. You okay? I nodded, breathless. Better than I've been in years. We danced again, slower this time, the air buzzing with unspoken justice. When the song ended, Lydia and Richard had vanished into the crowd, their image of perfection shattered. I saw her later, standing near the exit, whispering furiously to Marion. For once, I didn't feel the urge to shrink. I didn't even feel anger anymore, just quiet satisfaction. As the night went on, William stayed beside me. He made sure I was never left alone again, not out of pity, but as if it was the most natural thing in the world. When I laughed, he laughed. When I spoke, he listened. And every now and then, when our eyes met, something unspoken flickered there, something that wasn't part of the act. By the time the crowd began to thin and the lights dimmed, I realized something I hadn't expected. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about finding the version of myself that Lydia's cruelty had buried long ago, the one who was enough, just as she was. The party thinned, but the glow of victory lingered like the final note of a song. I could still feel Lydia's glare across the hall, a faint burn at the back of my neck, but it didn't sting anymore. Not like before. It was strange how humiliation had melted into calm, and calm had turned into something softer. Freedom, maybe. As the last guests drifted away, I slipped off my heels, my feet aching but my heart steady. I'd walked into this wedding as a shadow and somehow ended it under a chandelier. William found me again near the dessert table, still half full of untouched pastries. He handed me a glass of water. You survived? I laughed, quietly. Barely. He tilted his head, his expression thoughtful. You didn't just survive. You reclaimed something tonight. I wanted to argue, to deflect with my usual sarcasm, but his words reached deeper than I expected. Maybe he was right. Maybe tonight wasn't about Lydia or Richard or even revenge. Maybe it was about the small now forgotten part of me that had finally stood up straight again. The staff began clearing tables. The music faded to a faint instrumental hum. Guests trickled out with hugs and half-drunken goodbyes. My parents came by, beaming with pride they didn't fully understand. You looked lovely tonight, my mother said, glancing between William and me. And who's this handsome young man? William Wellington, he said, extending a hand with that same warm charm that could melt marble. It's a pleasure, Mrs. Miller. My father gave a small approving nod, and for once, there wasn't a hint of disappointment behind it. Just quiet surprise, maybe even admiration. When they left, William turned to me, smiling. You handled that well? Years of practice, I said. He chuckled. You know, when I stepped in tonight, I thought I was doing you a favor. But somewhere between the wine and the dance floor, I think you ended up teaching me something. Like what? That kindness is stronger than spectacle. And that grace, when used properly, is the best form of power. I blinked, unsure how to respond. There was something in his tone, gentle, deliberate, that made me feel like this wasn't just small talk. Thank you, I said softly. For helping me, even though you didn't have to. He studied me for a long moment. What makes you think I didn't want to? My breath caught. The ballroom was nearly empty now. Only the dim glow of the chandeliers remained, the air thick with fading laughter and the scent of roses. Somewhere in the distance, Lydia's voice rose, sharp, agitated, as she argued with Marion near the exit. I didn't need to hear the words. I already knew the tone. The control was slipping. William's voice drew me back. Can I walk you to your car? I nodded, and together we stepped outside into the cool night. The parking lot was a mosaic of shadows and reflections. The air smelled of rain and roses, and for the first time all day, I could breathe. My heels clicked softly against the pavement. For a while, neither of us spoke. It wasn't an awkward silence, more like a pause between chapters. Finally, I stopped beside my car. So this is it. For now, he said. I smiled faintly. I know tonight was just an act, but you really did save me from the most humiliating night of my life. He looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time, there was no trace of amusement in his eyes. Just sincerity. What makes you think it was just an act? The words hit harder than I expected. I blinked. Because you don't even know me. I know enough, he said quietly, stepping closer. I know you stayed kind even when others mocked you. I know you held your dignity when no one else offered it to you. I know you have the kind of strength most people mistake for silence. The air between us tightened. His voice dropped lower. And I know your sister doesn't deserve to define you. For a moment, I couldn't speak. It wasn't just what he said, it was the way he said it, like he'd been paying attention all night when no one else had in years. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, cream-colored business card. On the back, in clean handwriting, was a number. That's my direct line. If you ever want to see me again, not for revenge, not to prove a point, just because you want to, call me. I took it carefully, my fingers brushing his. What if I want to call you tonight? He smiled, the same half-smirk that had unraveled Lydia's confidence earlier. Then I'll answer. He gave a small bow of his head, a gesture that felt both old-fashioned and intimate, then turned toward his car. I stood there for a while, staring at the card under the streetlight. My heart felt strangely light, my shoulders unburdened. Somewhere behind me, laughter echoed from the ballroom, the remnants of Lydia's perfect night, fading like confetti in the dark. I slipped into my car, started the engine, and looked at the card again. William Wellington. The name looked impossibly elegant against the white paper. I didn't call him that night. Not immediately. I wanted to know that I was calling him for the right reason, not to extend the illusion, but because I genuinely wanted to hear his voice again. 2 days later, I did, and everything changed. 3 months later, we were officially dating. 6 months after that, we moved in together. It turned out that William wasn't just Richard's cousin. He was a successful tech entrepreneur, the kind who built companies from the ground up and treated his employees like family. But none of that mattered to me as much as how he treated me, as though I wasn't something to fix, but something to cherish. Exactly 1 year after Lydia's wedding, he proposed. Not at a grand ballroom, not in front of a crowd, but at the same hotel where we'd first met. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. When the ring slipped onto my finger, I felt more than love. I felt justice. Quiet, poetic justice. The woman who once sat alone at the reject table now had someone who saw her worth before the world did. And somewhere, in the dim corners of my mind, I could still hear Lydia's voice from that night, laughing, gloating, telling me not to look too miserable in the photos. She'd turned her wedding into my humiliation. But in doing so, she'd unknowingly introduced me to the man who'd change my life forever. Exactly 1 year later, I stood in front of a mirror, the same mirror I'd used on Lydia's wedding day, only this time, I wasn't forcing a smile. The reflection staring back at me was calm, radiant, and genuinely happy. I wasn't the forgotten sister or the family's career-obsessed spinster. I was Hannah Wellington, bride-to-be. Our wedding wasn't like Lydia's. There were no glittering chandeliers, no towering floral walls, no corporate sponsors pretending to be friends. Ours was intimate, just 60 people, candles instead of spotlights, laughter instead of performance. It wasn't about perfection. It was about peace. And yet, when I walked down that aisle and saw William waiting for me, his smile soft, steady, unshaken, it felt more cinematic than any luxury hall could have created. He looked at me the same way he did the night he said, "Act like you're with me." Only this time, there was no pretense, no act, no audience to impress. Just love, real and steady. When we exchanged vows, my hands trembled. "You saw me when I didn't see myself," I said, my voice breaking. And because of that, I learned that love isn't about rescue, it's about recognition. William smiled. "And I promise to keep recognizing you, every version of you, every day." The applause was warm and genuine. But even in that joy, I caught a glimpse of Lydia. She was sitting near the front, not the center of attention this time, not the queen of the night. She looked beautiful, of course, but quieter. Humbled, maybe. It had been her idea to be my maid of honor, an unexpected gesture after months of silence between us. At first, I didn't want to accept, but then I realized something. Forgiveness wasn't for her. It was for me. During her speech at the reception, Lydia's voice wavered more than I'd ever heard. "When I think about my sister," she said, holding the microphone with trembling hands, "I think of strength. I used to mistake her silence for weakness, her independence for loneliness. But I see now she just loved herself enough to wait for the right person." The crowd clapped. A few people wiped their eyes. And though her words sounded carefully rehearsed, there was something different in her tone, something that didn't exist at her own wedding. It wasn't arrogance. It was remorse. When she stepped down, she hugged me. It wasn't long, and it wasn't perfect, but it was real. For the first time in years, there was no rivalry in that embrace. Later, as the guests danced under soft amber lights, William and I sat together, watching the people who had once whispered about me, now smiling without pity. "Do you ever think about that night?" I asked him. "The wedding?" He said. "All the time. Best fake relationship I've ever had." I laughed. "You mean the beginning of our origin story?" He turned toward me. "No," he said. "The night I almost didn't talk to you. I was this close to leaving early. And then your sister said something cruel, and I realized that if I didn't step in, I'd regret it forever." "Why?" I asked. He smiled. "Because I've always believed some people are meant to meet in chaos." That line, "meant to meet in chaos," stayed with me. Because when I looked back, I realized Lydia's cruelty had been the storm that cleared the path for everything that followed. If she hadn't humiliated me that night, I might never have met William. If she hadn't laughed, I might never have found the courage to fight for my dignity. Sometimes, the universe uses other people's cruelty as a bridge to your transformation. That's the part no one tells you about revenge. It's rarely about payback. It's about reclaiming yourself. Lydia thought she was destroying me, but she was rebuilding me unintentionally, beautifully, completely. She made me see that happiness doesn't come from validation. It comes from freedom, from knowing who you are when no one's clapping. As the night wound down, I stood under the lanterns, watching our guests leave in pairs, holding hands, smiling. My parents kissed me on the cheek, their eyes soft with pride that had no conditions attached. Lydia approached again, this time quieter. "You looked really happy tonight," she said softly. "I am," I replied. She nodded, hesitating. "You deserve it, Hannah." That was it. No grand apology, no tearful confessions. But I didn't need one. The acknowledgement in her eyes was enough. For the first time, she wasn't looking down at me. She was looking across. When everyone had gone, William and I stood alone beneath the lights. He took my hands and kissed them gently. "You know," he said, "I think your sister's wedding was the best thing that ever happened to me." I smiled. "To us." He nodded. "To us." And as I leaned my head on his shoulder, I thought about the strange symmetry of it all. Lydia's wedding had been a lesson in humiliation. Mine was a testament to healing. Her laughter had once broken me. My peace was now her silence. Not the silence of guilt, but of understanding. Because, in the end, I didn't need to outshine her. I just needed to outgrow her. And that, I realized, was the truest revenge of all. So, if you're watching this story because someone once made you feel small, remember, you don't have to destroy them to win. You just have to build a life so genuine, so filled with quiet joy, that their cruelty no longer echoes in your world. Sometimes the people who humiliate you the most are the ones who unknowingly guide you toward your destiny. And when that happens, don't seek payback. Smile. Live well. Let your peace be your victory. If this story touched your heart, I want to thank you for staying until the end. May you find people who see your worth, and may you always have the courage to walk away from those who don't. Stay kind, stay strong, and if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Until next time, take care, and may your life always be filled with light, love, and a little bit of poetic justice.